know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
Welcome to United Front Radio. We're exploring the ideas that once made America great and how we can implement them again today. This is Daniela Walls, chair of the Tax Wall Street Party, and Kyle McCarthy, founding member of the United Front Against Austerity. Today we're continuing our discussion of the article, A World of Pure Imagination, How Occupy Turned to Anarchy, at againstausterity.org. Previously, we discussed the role of Wall Street in seeding the Occupy Wall Street movement with anarchist ideas. Today, we're putting this process in historical context by showing how the British Empire since the late 19th century has created an empire of ideas, polluting political movements with the occult, the New Age, and false economic doctrines.
Okay, so let's talk about William Blake, because if we're talking about the British Empire and we're talking about the New Age, I think this is sort of the nexus. He's generally credited as the first person to use the term New Age, which he gets from a guy named Emanuel Swedenborg. He's very little known now, but he was an important figure in the mid to late 1700s. And Blake, he's at the founding of this thing called the New Jerusalem Church in London that Swedenborg starts. Blake famously wrote this. He has an epic poem called Milton, and in the introduction he says, "I will not cease from mental flight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land." So there's this idea of building a Jerusalem in each person and building a Jerusalem out of the British Empire.
An internal Jerusalem and an external Jerusalem?
Yeah, it's weird. It leads directly into theosophy, which we talked about before. And I want to read a passage from a book. This is a little lengthy. It's called William Blake and the Radical Swedenborgians.
Okay.
And it shows how this is sort of the nexus of the New Age in terms of some of the more, what some people might think is more positive New Age stuff, but also in terms of some of the more radical and creepy stuff.
Okay,
there are undeniable links, this is all a quote, between the reading of Swedenborg and radical activity centered on a branch of radical Freemasons who operated internationally but gathered in London. An occult tradition of seeking spiritual illumination thrived in the 17th century but had since gone underground, marginalized by the progress of rationalist and empiricist modes of thinking, and was most fully preserved in clandestine Freemasonry. At the inception of Swedenborgianism into the European network of irregular Masonry, it blended in with the mainstays of Hermeticism, Kabbalism, Rosicrucianism, spiritualism, astrology, etc. Many lodges and Masonic societies welcomed Swedenborg's teaching. His central idea of correspondences, which linked all things material to a spiritual source, was used to back up notions of unusual rapport with other realities. For many, Swedenborgianism became an umbrella philosophy under which other occult ideas could be given a collective rationale, even if these were only remotely related to Swedenborg's doctrines. Some of these doctrines then turn into, like I said, theosophy. I think we talked about Alice Bailey before, and how all these New Age ideas sort of infiltrated the UN, into Aleister Crowley and his OTO, into this stuff like the Golden Dawn. And one of the reasons we bring up William Blake when we're talking about, we want to get back into Russell Brand and these other so-called truth tellers today, the listeners will have to go to like a Google image search and look up William Blake Albion, Albion. Mm-hmm. And Albion is like the central character in his mythology, it's very complex, but basically Albion is the first name for England. And my take is that Albion sort of represents this primordial man who like falls to earth and splits into parts and then like reemerges triumphantly as the new man. And Albion is this painting of this man standing naked, and he's sort of like bringing in all these, rays of sunlight into himself.
Yeah, people should look up the painting of Albion that goes along with the poem.
Right.
Because we're on the radio. And then the Beatles' Help album, John Lennon is standing in the pose of Albion. David Icke's, the cover of his book, The Truth Shall Set You Free, he's standing in the pose of Albion. And if you Google Russell Brand naked, which might be a little strange, but
there's going to be a few...
there's going to be a few images you don't want to see, a few pornographic images, but if you Google Russell Brand naked, you're going to see one of him standing in a square in London in front of a statue with his arms up in the same pose as Albion. This signifies the birth of the new age of the British Empire.
This pose of the arms raised up sort of like a Y is in the occult. It's called the sign of Typhon and Apophis. Mm-hmm. And Typhon is sort of the giant Satan figure. He's like a monster in Greek mythology, and Apophis is he's like the snake Satan figure in Egyptian mythology.
On David Icke's book cover, The Truth Shall Set You Free, he has a snake coiled between his legs.
And the idea here is sort of the same. It fits into, in the occult, this idea of Osiris. Osiris dies, and Typhon and Apophis are sort of like this Satan character that brings Osiris back to life by drawing in some sort of universal energy. In the occult, this sort of blurring of the lines between good and evil, where there's sort of like necessary counter forces and things like that. It just gets into all this creepy New Age stuff. And so back to this idea, we've got David Icke and we've got Russell Brand, who are recreating this painting of William Blake that's supposed to be like the ultimate representation of all this stuff. And again, we can see that John Lennon doing the same thing at different times.
Well, they're doing this pose of Typhon or the trident, which makes their body into a V. And they raise their arms above their head in an angle of 60 degrees, throw their head back, and are looking upwards. So you might want to look at these pictures. Even today, we have drugged-out pop stars like Pete Doherty, who used to date Kate Moss, who sings a song with his band Baby Shambles called Albion.
Yeah.
I understand.
It sounds like we're getting kind of off the beaten path, but I think maybe where we're trying to go is this idea that people look at a guy like Russell Brand and just say, he's just, he's a truth teller. And I think it's kind of the same thing as if you went back to the 60s and said that about Timothy Leary, who was an apostle of Aleister Crowley, or about, he had these other guys like Kenneth Grant, or you could even at a time say the same thing about someone like Charles Manson.
Russell Brand is not a Freemason like everybody assumes. People tend to put everything under the umbrella of Freemasonry. He has one of his True's news episodes where he addresses the question and he says, I'm not a Freemason. And that's true. He's probably not a Freemason. But he doesn't answer whether he's something very dark, which is Ordo Templi Orientis. That's what I want to know about. This Aleister Crowley dark sex magic cult. Because I don't want to end up taking political advice or revolution advice from somebody who's into human sacrifice and all the rest that we'll get into later. Can we talk about how what looks like fun New Age stuff on the surface has a darker dimension?
They bring in these sort of New Age ideas that are influenced by Satanism and are used to sort of derail a more constructive, at that time it was the anti-war movement. I think now it's to derail a New Deal.
Yeah. Because the movement that should be coming in precisely at this time historically is a New Deal.
And you can see the same thing. Europe is a little further down the road than we are. We've got Alexis Tsipras, who's doing all the right things. And then at the very same time, here we've got Russell Brand here in London. And in Europe, they've got Beppe Grillo. They've got Dieudonné, who's a French comedian. It's like all of these comedians coming out of the woodwork, and they've all got their symbolic thing.
It's Send in the Clowns. Google the LVX signs, and you'll see the graphic description.
And so, I think, we've got playing out this sort of, this symbolic drama that is just sort of manifesting as, what we think of as these spontaneous movements led by comedians. Mm-hmm. But you explain that in a way that was just such a duh moment for me when you talked about just the use of court jesters.
There's pictures of Russell Brand shaking the hand of the Queen, and I found...
in a Masonic handshake.
Right. And I found an article where he says that he has a tattoo on his inner groin area, on his inner thigh, of the head of the Queen. That just points to where his loyalties lie. If I had a picture of the head of Obama on near my vagina, I don't think that you would assume that I was loyal to McCain. Do you know what I'm saying? And it goes back to this court jester theory where, let's tie this to the British monarchy. Every monarchy hired a court jester. That was a necessary element. They were given the right to make fun of the queen or the king, but they took just enough steam out of the kettle to make the subjects laugh or divert the subjects' attention onto more minor things like the king's haircut or the way the king spoke or anything that's just less relevant so that it wouldn't spark real revolution. You can't have your subjects so steamed up or so focused so as to start a real revolution. And unfortunately, I think that Russell Brand is playing this role perfectly right now with a mix of humor and diversion and dead-end revolutionary tactics. That's why I keep bringing him up so much. I think it's more dangerous than we think. And there's other clowns like him, like Beppe Grillo in Italy.
So, and I think you might have to take another look at people, even like Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, these political comics. I always kind of thought of it, you look back at like Mark Twain or something like that. I always thought of it as, it's just because it's too controversial to talk directly about politics so that the comedians come in and they're able to do it in this oblique way.
No, that's not it at all. They're America's court jesters. We don't have a monarchy, but we have a ruling class and financial oligarchs.
Right.
Jon Stewart's only brother is the head of the New York Stock Exchange.
Right.
He's not a grassroots guy, and he knows his role. Stewart's Wall Street's court jester. Russell Brand is the Queen's court jester.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that. And
he has a tattoo of the head of the Queen on his upper inner thigh that he says he likes to look at often.
And two other tattoos we might want to mention.
Yeah, which is the tattoo, which I was trying to find for a long time, what that tattoo of the man with the whistle was on his arm, until we finally figured out that it was the Pied Piper, and he often refers to himself as the Pied Piper. Please read The Myth of the Pied Piper.
Today we find out that Russell Brand is publishing a series of children's books called Russell Brand's Trickster Tales, and the first in the series is The Pied Piper of Hamelin, about, the guy who's paid to take rats out of the town of Hamelin, and the people don't pay him up, and so he leads the children out to their doom.
He's telling you directly. He often refers to himself as the trickster.
Right.
He's the mythological trickster.
The other one we saw, he's got this white dog he brings everywhere with him. The Fool card in the tarot is like a central trickster character, and the Fool has this white dog with him that's kind of like his alter ego.
He's a cult all the way down the line. He's right. A mixture of the Fool character, the trickster becoming the court jester. The point is, don't have this guy lead you into battle. Don't have this guy lead you into revolution. It's a dead end. He's leading you off a cliff.
Why do they rub this in? They just rub it right in your face, and then people are not picking up on it. There's a video.
Well, people don't know what to make of it. I mean, for instance, he has this Truth series, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the truth in the news. And he's got this Truth series, and in every one of the Truth series, he's sitting there reading the newspaper with his wrist exposed with the number 33 in the exact same font that the 33 is written on the New York Federal Reserve building. The address of the New York Federal Reserve is 33 Liberty Street, I think.
And 33 is obviously the central number in Freemasonry.
Right, but you see, none of us are experts in this. I'm especially not, because women aren't allowed to be Freemasons. So I'll never find out. But maybe one of our listeners can tell us what the hell this means. He's there with a 33 on his wrist. This is what he chose to have tattooed on his body, among other occult symbolism. I mean, do you have an idea what the 33 means?
In the 30, there are 33 degrees of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. I think it goes back to Kabbalism again. It goes back to all the stuff we were talking about before with, Swedenborg and William Blake and all these people. They bring the Kabbalah, which is this ancient, Hebrew mysticism, into Freemasonry. And I think the 33 might have some reference to that. There's like 33 channels on the Tree of Life or something weird.
Well, the point is that we're talking about revolution infiltration. And do you want to follow a guy smeared in occult symbolism and doesn't tell you the meaning of it all and has a picture of the Queen on his inner thigh? Or do you want to follow the model of somebody like Alexis Tsipras from the Syriza Party who's actually taking power and, you know what I mean, has the people's best interest at heart, calling for no cuts?
Right.
I mean, Russell Brand was one of the performers at the anti-austerity rally in England. You know, you're one of the founders of the United Front Against Austerity, and I work for the United Front Against Austerity too. 50,000 people gather for an anti-austerity march in England. Austerity means no cuts to the social safety net, that there are other ways to get our money than by cutting social services, by things like taxing Wall Street and nationalizing the Federal Reserve. We're not broke, the money's there. Point is, this guy gets up on stage, and I only watched 1 second of it today because I didn't have much time. And I was absolutely furious. Because you know what his first joke was, Kyle? He says, we really need the social safety net because it really helped improve my heroin habit when I was taking benefits. You know? And I think these kinds of things are extremely dangerous.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't see that.
He didn't say because children are starving and mothers need better nutrition so babies aren't born with cognitive deficiencies. It's humane, and not giving people enough to eat and live in a basic lifestyle is genocide. He's not saying any of that. He says, oh, it allowed me to sustain my heroin habit. Mm-hmm. Well, fuck you, buddy. Sorry.
Yeah, and I mean, and then the bigger point is that he's the court jester. It's all criticism of things that are not terribly important, like when he goes on to these shows and is criticizing the BBC for being out of touch or being whatever, a bunch of rich white guys. Mm-hmm. And then he's telling people not to vote. When does he come in and say, we've got to take back the Bank of England and finance infrastructure? You know, mm-hmm. Why are people fooled by this kind of stuff? Why do people get taken in by Beppe Grillo, who says that labor unions are the cause of the European depression? Why do they get taken in by Dieudonné? Dieudonné is kind of like a Trojan horse for the French National Front Party.
Because it's the first time that somebody goes on network mainstream television and is calling for just saying the word revolution. You know, that should prick your ears a little bit, because if somebody gets on national mainstream television for an hour interview, and he's on every mainstream show, that's because they want him there. Right. They're trying to censor somebody like Alexis Tsipras as much as they can. They're promoting Russell Brand. They're actively promoting Russell Brand.
And I suspect that the people listening to this show are going to understand basically what's going on here, and they're not going to be tricked by a Russell Brand. But if we're trying to stop real revolutions from being steered off course or from being preempted, we want a real revolution, and we want to inoculate people against fake revolutions.
Right, maybe the people listening to this show, but what we're talking about, what we're going to do about the average occupier.
Right.
And how we can have a mass movement that is steered in the right direction. And how that person who steers it can have some platform.
Or the average 16-year-old who is going to be eligible to vote in the 2016 presidential election, and right now is listening to Russell Brand and saying, oh, wow, this guy really says what he means.
Well, that gets into what we were talking about the last episode and this episode, which is that the younger generation's never seen a thriving industrial economy. We're always taught that the past was worse and that we're ever evolving, constantly getting better. Our quality of life since 1967 has declined by 2/3. This new generation has no concept of what a real quality of life actually is.
Right.
Imagine if we had kept up with inflation and the minimum wage was like $25 an hour, and that's what people were making. And there were jobs that were less demoralizing than working at McDonald's. Mm-hmm. And being in the service industry. There's a lot of people out there making $7 to $10 an hour, $13 an hour at most, pushing papers or working in the service industry. They would be blown away by it. That was normal at one point.
The idea that you get from a lot of people associated with Occupy, I'm not sure if I've heard this from Russell Brand, but you definitely hear it from people of sort of an anarchist persuasion that, the real problem is technology. The reason that we've lost our standard of living is that robots make everything, or we've got computers now, or whatever. So basically, like, human labor is worth
is obsolete.
less. Yeah, it becomes obsolete, and so what we need is the basic minimum income, which is just like
that's what this whole new age cult of personality, like Daniel Pinchback and Russell Brand promoting ayahuasca and all this stuff, are saying that we're in a post-industrial age where labor is unnecessary, and so now we have to figure out what to do with these people. So put them on a basic minimum income. Sounds like a good thing.
Wage.
But it sounds like it's a basic monthly income, and get them out of the workforce, just give them enough not to starve. That's a form of slavery. That's a form of neo-feudalism. And we had talked before about how if we're going down this course that Russell Brand is suggesting, we're heading toward neo-feudalism, which is what the ruling classes have always wanted.
Well, and we talked about earlier about the social credit ideas, how that came out of this New Age magazine.
When you get into basic minimum income and social credit, can you please explain why this isn't a good idea, why it sounds like a good idea, but ultimately it isn't a good idea?
Yeah, and the other things you could look at are, it's called decrescita in Italy or décroissance in France. The same basic thing that we need. Technology has disemployed us, and so now what we need is degrowth. Mm-hmm. We need to basically slow down the engine of the economy, and we need to just distribute a dividend of the production of society into...
There's nothing new about the ruling class wanting degrowth. The ruling class has always wanted degrowth.
Right. I think the important thing to remember, and the important thing anytime you're looking at, social credit, or you're looking at whatever, any of this basic minimum income stuff, where in these theories is free trade? Where in these theories is Wall Street regulation? Where is the national bank? It's basically you can get these kinds of theories to work. I think, and it's just all of these ideologies, once they get into the economy, they ignore these fundamental issues of what is called political economy. Basically, what are the political decisions that create the factors of the economy? Basically, do you have a protective tariff? Do you have what are the interest rates set by your central bank? All this kind of stuff.
These ideas aren't even close to being discussed anymore.
Right, because they just kind of track the well, we've got more technology and we've got job loss. Therefore A equals B. We're screwed. Let's just print some money for ourselves. And I think why they bring in this spiritualism, like the New Age stuff, it's kind of, you just mentioned ayahuasca. I mean, it's
you'll be happy to live in a yurt off the land, right, and won't want anything more. If you take enough psychedelics, you'll be happy to live in a tent.
Yeah, I mean, it's like this neo-primitivism stuff where that becomes like an ideal to live in. This austerity becomes like a spiritual goal.
Yeah. Well, if you've ever actually lived that way, there are periods in my life where I've lived in communes. It's disgusting. You won't enjoy it for very long. Get me the hell out of this flop house.
Get me some soap.
Who's sharing my toothbrush? Ew, that guy. And this is what the ruling class wants. They want to push the idea of it's post-industrialization. We're not going back to an industrial economy. We have to figure out what to do with the slaves. The only technology we're interested in is the technology that involves life extension for the ruling class, not for us. And keeping us in a brave new world 35 years young forever. Mm-hmm. And they have no intention, and they're not going to publicize anything that talks about going back to a productive industrial economy. They don't mm-hmm. want that. They consider it polluting. They have been successful in not having that in third world countries, especially Africa. They don't want industrialization. I was reading something the other day where somebody said that they envisioned a Fifth Avenue in every city in Africa. And you know what? For the average lefty, they would scream and yell and say, that sounds like the most awful thing in the world. They simply can't have it. We can't continue this American standard of living. We have to go backwards. And I say, you know what? Great. I would love an opera house, public libraries, hospitals, schools, infrastructure, lights, electricity, abundant electricity in Africa. We're not saying that we want dirty, smelly smog in cars. You know where population goes down? It's in educated, industrialized societies. Europe's population is going down, as is the more educated classes of America, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, that's how population is reduced, not by sticking freaking chemicals in people's water. there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. If you industrialize, civilize, and educate people, population naturally reduces. But why shouldn't there be an opera house and a Fifth Avenue in the cities in Africa? I believe in civilization. I believe it's absolutely fine if you want to, once in your life, take a trip to the Amazon to have some sort of experience. Fine. However, they should have libraries with great books in them.
Well, and even in the United States, you look at all of these, you look at high school kids and you just think about what does the future have in store for them? Or I look at my own kids, which, they're further off from that. But, do you want them to be knowledge workers? Should they just be these sort of like Western European petty bourgeois, one guy called them, not barnacles, I think office plankton. There's a guy we know in Russia. They refer to these people in Moscow as office plankton. But
I love that.
Or are my kids or the kids across the street or the kids in high school now going to have some kind of a shot at shaping what the world looks like? Maybe, we want to bring water into the deserts.
There's nothing worse than sitting in an office watching the clock being an office plankton. I'd prefer your kids to do something heroic, like building bridges.
And that doesn't have to mean that everyone's got a wrench in their hand. There need to be designers and engineers and urban planners and financiers even, people to arrange the credit that's going to finance these projects. It's not like a white-collar or office sector goes away. It's just like, where are people's efforts directed? I think we might have read last week a quote from William McKinley where he talks about $1 just being relative to what an hour of labor can purchase. What's the value of your labor, and how protectionism and, dare we say it, central planning elevates the value of your labor because it's going to direct it into things that create wealth that you can use. Where right now we've just got open borders and open banks and whatever. All of the social surplus, whatever actually does get made, is just getting sucked up into the Wall Street vacuum and sent to the Cayman Islands.
The point is right now we need a New Deal revolution. What we're getting force-fed is a spiritual anarchistic revolution, which has never worked.
Right.
Which has never worked. Anarchism always fails. That's what infiltrated Occupy, and that became the ruling ideology. It went from any initial New Deal thrust, making Wall Street demands. And, it needs to be said that anarchism is appealing to people because they don't have to think. It's not a rational political ideology. It's emotional based. I went through a long phase of being an anarchist, and that's just because it felt good. It was my second breaking free from my parents. But there was nothing rational, and I didn't have to read, and I didn't have to think, and I didn't have to learn about history, and I didn't have to understand, and I didn't have to learn about economics. And these things people believe are difficult. As soon as you start talking about economic principles, people tune out. It's so much easier to go to, like, the environment because I feel bad for animals, and that feeling is going to push me into action. Mm-hmm. But it's time that people have to start living in their rational mind and saying, what is a revolution? What's worked? What does the society need?
If you want to go to the right wing and look at the libertarians who are sort of, on the left wing, we've got radical environmentalism and sort of left anarchism, people who subscribe to this Noam Chomsky stuff like anarcho-syndicalism and all this crap. Mm-hmm. And on the right wing, you've got the libertarians, and I think they're starting to maybe dwindle in numbers as Ron Paul fades into history. It's the same kind of a thing. Like for them, it's like a hyper technicality about economic theorems, and they're just immune to any logic about things like free trade, or they'll refuse to discuss free trade, and they want to try to trap you into, well, look at what happened to the Fed policy and the crash of 1921 and blah blah blah.
Ron Paul came out and simplified some economic ideas, even though he was leading people astray by, like we said, saying "end the Fed." It's a catchy slogan and it sounds good, but like we've said in the last episodes, it's simply not realistic.
Well, and Ron Paul came out. This is in the congressional record. I think there might even be a video of him on the floor of Congress saying this. I think the quote is, "We have nothing to fear from world government." From something like, from a global world currency, and he meant the gold standard, from, single regulatory system or something like that.
We do, Ron Paul. We have something to fear from world government. Thank you very much. We do, Ron Paul. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and this stuff, it's in... If you look at the Austrian school, look at someone like von Mises, and then you look at the Communist Manifesto side by side, they want the exact same thing. They've got a slightly different way of getting there, but it's this idea that, everyone's just going to cooperate, and it's going to be, just the consent of the people, and things are going to go where they need to go because of people's good nature. But really, all that is a big trap to get feudalism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same it's the same thing now. It's basically just kill off whatever might be a New Deal mass strike that's going to bring a wave of populism and a bunch of new laws that are going to smother Wall Street and rebuild a New Deal system.
Yeah, and the entire generation is just walking off the cliff toward neo-feudalism.
Right.
The youth are turning to anarchy because they have no historical perspective on successful revolutions. And that's what we hoped the show would provide. When we say in the beginning, take the pieces of history that have worked and try to bring them back.
Yeah.
Like, anarchists are unlikely to make successful revolutions in the future, just as that they have in the past. If people are wondering why we're going off into all these dark places, and it seems like we're going off on tangents, it's because we're trying to provide a sketch that's something like Russell Brand, or somebody like Russell Brand, or something like Occupy, turning into anarchism, is London and the banks almost giving us a self-destruct program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it's a template. If people go back and take a look at the article that was up at againstausterity.org. What is the name of it?
A world of pure imagination. How Occupy turned to anarchy at againstausterity.org.
We get into not just Occupy, but into some of the other cultural tropes that are coming up, or really cultural developments. Everything from marijuana and psychedelic drugs entering the mainstream again, to pornography. A lot of these things are part of this same package. It's like New Age spiritualism.
Which people can now look back, and it's very common to think that LSD and that hippie milieu distracted the anti-war movement.
Yeah. I mean...
The same way pushing ayahuasca on the middle classes is distracting them from any thrust against the banks.
Like we were saying before, it turns their poverty, it turns austerity into a goal, or into some sort of a...
experimentation with drugs has always been a petite bourgeois form of revolution.
It turns it into like a spiritual ideal. The same thing. Why are all these people into the Dalai Lama?
Right,
they really
right.
looked into who that guy was or what he's actually saying. Why would any sane person want any part of that thing?
I just watched a completely worthless clip of Russell Brand interviewing the Dalai Lama, which I got nothing spiritual out of. And the entire audience, there weren't any black people there, I can tell you that. It was just a bunch of white, middle class, like I said, petite bourgeois audience members trying to find some sort of meaning because their lives are so inherently boring.
Yeah, for one thing, he and his brother are on the CIA payroll. For another thing, they are like the feudal nobility of Tibet. That you watch some of these, the people who are like the foot soldiers of the lamas, or
that's right. People forget that the Dalai Lama is nobility. He's born into it.
And it gets all of this New Age stuff is really not so far removed from.
Russell Brand, he's always knocking the politicians. He's like, look at their faces. They're not meant to be leading. They're the admin bots.
Yeah.
And he's like, have them do the admin. There's whatever. He goes into that. Well, the Dalai Lama was born into being the Dalai Lama.
Right. Where is the merit of the caste system?
Exactly. We're going around worshiping a king. I have such a major problem with New Age stuff because to me, all it is a bunch of bored people, who are in boring marriages, like that book Eat, Pray, Love. Her whole search was based on the fact that she was just miserable, in a boring, mundane life. And she goes out to meditate. And what happens in the end of the book? Nothing. She just finds another guy that's a little bit better than the first.
Well, and if people want to see, people may not be fooled by Russell Brand, just use Oprah as an example. Look at the kinds of things that she promotes with all this stuff like The Secret and this, who's her guru, that little German guy.
Eckhart Tolle.
Well,
Eckhart Tolle is Russell Brand's guru as well. There's an entire Trues episode where he's reading Eckhart Tolle on his roof, and he said, Eckhart Tolle is my guru.
Oh my God.
Krishnamurti and Eckhart Tolle are his gurus. Eckhart Tolle is also, and Deepak Chopra, don't forget him. Deepak Chopra is Lady Gaga's guru.
Yeah, and Krishnamurti, we've talked about the Theosophical Society at some length in this thing. I'm not sure if we've clarified it at all, but he was supposed to be like the new Christ of the Theosophists, and then he was born into this. They just sort of scooped him up out of India and said, "You're going to be the new Christ," and then he came of age and said, "No, thank you."
It's just such self-centered garbage. Like, what are these people doing?
Yeah, so I mean, it is the petty bourgeois, white, bored people who don't have too many things to worry about. But I think the real threat is that it's also kids. These same kids who today are being raised on Lady Gaga, Burning Man, and this kind of insane hip-hop culture that's going on today that's, I think, possibly even worse than gangster rap, because it's all bringing in like the middle class world into just drug use and hedonism.
I mean, if they're going to Burning Man, and what is this like self-seeking? But it's not like just going to a concert. It's part of this Rousseauian return.
It's neo-primitivism.
Yeah, neo-primitivism.
We've talked about
the idea of the noble savage.
Some of the stuff like the manosphere, that whole thing, and CrossFit gyms and the paleo diet, and this kind of stuff is also, it's curious how on the left you get veganism, on the right you get the paleo diet. It's kind of like just some of these people, their whole identity becomes what they eat. For the record, I'm a vegan, but it's not something I really think about. I just kind of eat potatoes for lunch. But
but it becomes an identity.
Yeah.
It fills a lot of time having to find the food to fulfill a special diet. It fulfills part of your day. Again, it goes back to that idea of being bored.
Right.
People who are really involved in what they're doing just eat to survive and eat as quick as they can.
Yeah, and not that there's anything wrong with food, but yeah, it's just funny how these chefs are like our new celebrities. And again, it's just wasting your time on dumb things that are not that important to distract you from the fact that, you don't have kids, your job stinks, your house is, in foreclosure, or maybe you're living in a sort of beneath your potential.
To distract you from the fact that Wall Street's currently in the process of embezzling your potential, squandering what's left of your potential.
You get sucked into all this stuff about personal development, and whether that's like people who are all into the bodybuilding stuff now, people who are into transcendental meditation, which is like I think that's like the new Scientology, is all these people who are into meditation.
Or it comes out in more overt forms of anger. I feel like this new ageism and this obsession with diet is like kind of a form of like anorexia or self-mutilation in a way. Not that it's actual anorexia, but it's this need to control something. Or it comes out in overt anger like misogyny, like you see in the manosphere. Or on shows like Opie and Anthony, and this whole thing, the rise of Joe Rogan, which is all intermixed with ayahuasca. It comes out in this because ultimate fighting, yeah, because they're disenfranchised. Comes out in the form of different types of aggression.
Yeah, I think we should do a whole show on that topic. It is really interesting how it's like today to be a man is, you got a plaid shirt and a beard and you watch Ultimate Fighting, or maybe, even these people that are into these sort of craft hobbies, like, I make my own craft beer.
I see, yeah, right.
And again, there's having hobbies is fun and everything. It's just that when that becomes your identity, and when you're so afraid of political action, or you're so afraid that, you can't even have a conversation.
It's not that they're afraid of political action. It's that they don't even know where to start.
Yeah.
I don't believe that people are inherently that afraid. I think they're just confused, and their heads are so turned around that it's just like they throw their hands up. Maybe they are afraid people don't want to get, the backlash of their family and friends. But, like, where is the collective anger at the banks? That's it. It's like if you're not fighting bankers, you're spinning your wheels. It's like that should be everybody's main focus right now at this time in our history. Like, we're under financial dictatorship. Where are all the men to help fight against Wall Street and take their jobs back? If we were on nightly news saying, here's a program. This program has worked before. This program was responsible for your once great quality of life. This program led to times when America was called great. And here's a program, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can read the program at againstausterity.org or textwallstreetparty.org. Is it as romantic to understand economic principles and get behind those, or to go off to the jungle and take ayahuasca, or fly off to Burning Man and tell your friends all about it, or pitch a tent at an Occupy encampment and tell your friends all about it. I think it's more romantic to learn about what it takes to fight bankers. When we installed economic principles like during the New Deal, that's because we had a leader. We had a president, FDR, who went out and made magnificent speeches. How difficult is it going to be for people to get excited about learning economic principles?
Well, and FDR didn't come out of nowhere. You know, I think the direct precedent to the New Deal was the Prairie Populists coming out of Omaha.
Mm-hmm.
And these were, farmers with their backs against the wall saying, we need parity. We need a fair price for our product. We need, they had a whole litany of items.
That's why it's so important that our candidate is in Nebraska at the moment, because this is where this all started. People should visit danfornebraska.com. Check out Dan, donate to Dan, volunteer to help for Dan, because this is exactly the place where this all started.
And it's a long process. I mean, you go from there to the thing that connects that to the New Deal directly. They have these things called chautauquas or chautauquas, like a traveling entertainment show. They basically combine music and art with political speeches, and that brought together people like William Jennings Bryan, who is from Lincoln, Nebraska, and was sort of followed on the heels of these Prairie Populists, and even Roosevelt gave a bunch of speeches at these. It just sort of became part of the popular culture, where it's like...
That's the whole point right there, Kyle. It's not part of the popular culture right now. Talking about Russell Brand and ayahuasca and and Burning Man, that's part of the popular culture. That's what we're trying to say. The popular culture isn't how do we get our jobs back? How do we put Americans back to work? How do we restrain Wall Street? That's not part of the popular dialogue.
People are looking for like this mass strike moment. Look at Coachella or Lollapalooza or something. You take that number of people and direct them against Wall Street. And something like that's going to dwarf Occupy Wall Street. It really doesn't take much to put 100,000 people isn't really that many, but you put that many people in front of the camera, and it's going to be a real cultural
but people
moment.
can get their minds around the music at Lollapalooza. It's relaxing. It's enjoyable. It's not relaxing to have to learn about economic issues. People recoil at that. We might enjoy learning about it, but people recoil. As soon as I start talking about economic issues, people just immediately turn off their brains and say that is just too hard for me to understand. And that is a giant shame, because we're under economic dictatorship.
Mm-hmm.
We're not under any other kind of dictatorship right now. We're not under government dictatorship.
Obviously, it's the million-dollar question. Like, what do you do to get a mass movement going? And people can point out a lot of reasons why it's impossible. Or
there's this entire sleeping middle class. Occupy is so small, and so is the Tea Party, compared to this giant middle class, which is inherently New Deal. America is inherently a New Deal society. It's not inherently an anarchistic socialist society like Occupy was presenting, and it's not a libertarian Austrian economic society. We're a New Deal country, period. We just need the middle class to wake up. I don't even care about these fringe groups anymore, honestly.
Yeah, I guess the problem with the fringe groups, whether you're talking about radical leftists or radical, libertarians on the right, is that they are the most vocal and the most active and the most sort of dedicated to their cause. So
yeah, that's true. But you know who's also vocal and dedicated to the cause? The mainstream left. And they're doing a terrible injustice by focusing on the wrong issues too. They're sucked into the climate change battle and gay rights. You know what I'm saying? Like, those are great issues. Fine. They're not the main issue.
I feel like the real turning point is you've got to smash the Republican Party as it stands now and split the Democratic Party into these Wall Street and populist factions. And then the populist faction is naturally going to grow into becoming the dominant political force in the U.S.
Well, the Republican Party is already smashing itself, because one by one they keep getting in these reactionary, fringe, wingnut, Koch brother funded candidates. And the Koch brothers might be excited that they're taking over the Republican Party. However, that's going to end up making the Republican Party so fringe that it's going to inherently make itself obsolete.
Yeah, and at some point people are becoming so desperate that they can only care so much about, immigration, and no one's going to get that worked up about the inheritance tax when they can't keep themselves out of foreclosure.
people are just going to say, okay, well, then what do we do? Well, we wrote up an emergency plan to end the economic depression at againstausterity.org and on taxwallstreetparty.org. So read that platform. That's what you do. Try to understand it. Do yourself a favor and try to understand it.
I think we've got to start at the lower levels of, even just the independent media. You look at these people like Alex Jones and people on that level. It needs to become embarrassing to not stand for these kind of programmatic points.
All of the comments under Alex Jones videos are people saying, I'm sick of this. I'm sick of him not presenting a solution. I'm sick of just this constant fear-mongering. And as you said to me, people are sick of losing. People want to win. Believe me or don't believe me, I don't give a hoot anymore. There's historians and smarter people than us have helped organize this program that has worked in America's past. It's at againstausterity.org, hit program. The only thing that's going to work again. There's no other option here.
Yeah, and it is, part of it is you've just got to deflect every one of these attacks coming from people like Russell Brand. And even, I noticed when he spoke at that anti-austerity assembly, even in there, a lot of the comments to the article it seemed like people had sort of been inoculated against him and were seeing right through it pretty quickly. I think it's a good sign. The more people are expecting to be lied to, the more they're sort of looking for what the lie is.
I agree. He's going to let people down by misleading them, and then they're going to figure that out fast, just in the same way Jones misled people by supporting Rand and Ron Paul.
Yeah, but I just don't see any kind of a real... They keep putting Russell Brand up in front of people, yet I don't see much of a mass movement developing behind him. In the same way, like even in Europe, you can see Beppe Grillo is sort of headed for obscurity.
Yeah, that's a big sign of hope that they pushed Beppe Grillo up there in Italy, and his poll numbers have fallen steeply, and somebody like Alexis Tsipras is on the rise. Mm-hmm. So people, when they say people are waking up, I'm not so sure it's in the New Age sense. They're just saying, I'm sick of being lied to. I want something real. I want something tangible. I want something that isn't one of these fringe.
Yeah, and I think you need to defeat these sort of false fronts. On the other hand, you need to keep finding opportunities to get the real program out there. And when people recognize it more and more, or when people see it more and more, they'll start to recognize it. And I think, like with Dan Burdorf's campaign in Nebraska, people look at something like that and say, come on, what's the point? It's that third party is never going to get anywhere. You'd be lucky to get on the ballot. There's no chance of winning. And the problem with third parties in America is that their program stinks.
Exactly. Talk about talk about why the third parties and what their program points are that stink.
Well, look at, the Green Party has a number of things in common with us, but the problem is that it's buried within just this rat's nest of crazy stuff where they put, building sustainable urban bike lanes on the same level as nationalizing the Federal Reserve.
Exactly.
So it's just a laundry list, and then in the public face of the Green Party,
well, they throw those things in there because they think that that's what people are going to relate to. We get that all the time. People always say to me, well, why don't you throw in some environmental things? Why don't you throw in anti-nuclear? Why don't you throw in bike lanes? And I'm like, because we're not going to get bogged down in that. That stuff will be up to the individual state and the individual candidate. Right. We're not getting bogged down in it like these other third parties got bogged down in. We're shooting the arrow at the heart of Mordor, which, I know you love when I make Lord of the Rings references.
You're a nerd.
Don't make me start calling you Aragon. That's when you but like but the fight against Wall Street is the fight of our time, and people should ask what they're doing to fight financial oligarchy in their time. Do people want the infrastructure of the U.S. rebuilt to a 21st century infrastructure? We're at a D+ rating. Do people want that to go up to an A? Can they even imagine what an A would be? Maglev rail, new cleaner, abundant forms of energy. Do they want 0% student loans instead of what they're up to now, 6 to 8%? Do people want Medicare for all? Do they want to restore American industry and family farms? Do they want a global peace race? Do they want to save the VA from cuts? Do they want to hire 1,000 new VA doctors? Do you basically want the once great American quality of life back that was stolen by Wall Street. And if people
And
want
where-
those things back, they have to work for them.
Where are these goddamn progressive Democrats on even like the simplest of issues, Medicare for all, which some of them stand for? This John Conyers, who I consider to be a pretty good congressman if he can stay in this year, put out that HR 676, and that's kind of like one of the staples of the progressive Democrats is basically a public insurance system. Everyone in, no one out, private delivery, private choice of doctor and hospital, but it's all fully paid for through a public system. And it basically, if you look at health expenditures per capita, if we basically had the Canadian system, you'd cut down a third to almost a half of the cost of health insurance. I mean, I just got my insurance rates for a family of four. It just went up to $1,400 a month. It's crazy.
Yeah.
I can't afford this anymore. You know, you look at some of the older people who've had health histories. I've heard of people who pay upwards of $5,000 to $10,000 a month because they've had cancer in the past or things like that. It's totally obscene. And meanwhile, even these good legislators like Elizabeth Warren are still out there just talking with Thomas Piketty about, rising wealth inequality. Well, give us pardon the almost swearing, but, give us the solutions. Let's stop complaining about the fact that we have wealth inequality and start talking about what are the things that we need to do to turn that around. Part of it is economic growth, reindustrialization. I mean, every minute that they're not talking about that kind of stuff is just wasted. They've got these audiences of people politely clapping it.
This whole NSA scandal drove me nuts too. Now everybody's focused on that because what it does is whatever black hand in government set that up, who knows who's doing the spying, whether it's private organizations or whatever, but whoever set that up to be a big media story, that's all about making the government into the enemy. And all that does is hand the power over to the banks and the corporations. So the banks and the corporations own the media, so what do? They ran 24/7. The NSA is spying on you. Who cares? The NSA is spying on us right now. When these other people are like, the NSA is spying on me, I'm sexting my boyfriend. You're not doing anything. That's going to get you in trouble.
Look what it does with, I don't know about you, but every time I go onto YouTube or open up my email, I've got another message from Lawrence Lessig, who I
that
never
guy
contacted. So I'm not sure why he's contacting me, but...
That guy funded by Silicon Valley, the libertarians of all libertarians.
Yeah, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and people like this. So, he's got this thing, the Mayday PAC, and we're going to fund revolutionary political leaders with our Mayday PAC. And these are the new... There's no such thing anymore in America as an industrial elite. Where's the Henry Ford, or where's the Roger Blau of U.S. Steel, who is like the big enemy image during the Kennedy administration.
Well, they've been replaced by the Silicon Valley elite.
Yeah.
Because we live in this world of pure imagination.
There are a lot of bad things to say about Henry Ford, but he employed people and he made cars. And
can I just to interrupt so people don't think that there's gunshots? If people are wondering what those sounds are, it's the 4th of July, and there are fireworks going off tonight.
That's the sound of America.
But if you think like the federal government's your enemy, then you've been brainwashed by this propaganda that's proliferated by billionaires. And it's time to get your head screwed on straight and be American and realize that it's always been Wall Street and the bankers that are the enemy.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say about getting into electoral contests, it's a huge uphill battle when you're talking about like a race for U.S. Senate and you're talking about especially running as the tax Wall Street party. I mean, we're doing our best, but at this point we're still mostly running, trying to run protest candidates to get these issues out there to try to force the other candidates to respond.
Right.
Basically to use it as a vehicle to push these ideas out into the public. At the level of a congressional district, especially one that maybe leans a little bit to the right, the Democratic parties are dead. They are disorganized. They're not totally controlled by the CIA or whatever. These are just normal people who can't get it together, and when they hear good ideas, they're all over. We've got a friend who's been very involved with the Democratic Party in Pennsylvania and is gearing up to run for Congress in 2016. He's coming in with this identical program, and people are loving every minute of it, and they're fully supportive of him.
Right.
You know, it's still difficult to get on the ballot.
Well, he reported to us that the Democrats are like, their heads are blown. They're like, we can't believe this program. This is amazing. This is the program we want to push the Democratic Party forward. They just don't. Are people just ignorant? Do they just not know about these ideas?
I think that's a big part of it. And the thing is, you can't. It's not like there is this secret cabal is so big and so all pervasive that they control everybody down to the dog catcher. You know, they control the media, they control the national political system, but they're not going to be able to plug every hole in the dike. And so we need to get out there.
You need to fight them. Media. You need to fight them in the spaces in between.
Yeah, you need to get involved in your school board. If you've got your school board is dealing with pension cuts or something, get out there and talk about the Wall Street sales tax, because
you go into your school board and even say the main thing we need is a Wall Street sales tax. Wall Street pays no tax, no corporate income tax, no federal income tax, no transaction tax.
Illinois, where I live, has the worst pension crisis in the nation, and you can look into these. It's called the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report. This is kind of infamous in the conspiracy research world. There's this guy who's out there talking about him, but it is very interesting because you can see, like, line by line where all the money was invested. You know, what's sort of on the books versus what is set aside for future obligations and that kind of thing. But you know, at the teachers' pension funds and municipal pensions and so forth, this Bank of North Dakota, the one good thing, or the main good thing about that is that the municipal pensions are invested in a state bank and go right back into infrastructure. You know, that's great. In a place like Illinois, they go to investment advisors, and these guys went out in 2009 and flushed the whole thing into credit default swaps, mortgage-backed securities, all this kind of stuff. So it's
just like how they want to privatize Social Security so they can invest it. That'd be lovely.
Yeah, so I mean, the teachers have been out there, these people working for decades of their life, setting aside this little nut every month, hoping to be able to one day retire on it because they're not eligible for Social Security. And their money is being managed by goddamn Wall Street, who takes it out there and just sinks it in something, and these brokers run away with just, you know, huge broker fees.
Why would anybody put their money into the hands of a broker on Wall Street? That never made any sense to me. It's like if you took your life savings and plopped it on a table with a guy snorting cocaine. You're like, like, am I too simple-minded for just saying that? Like, what in the world? That doesn't make any sense to me.
And so the solution to that, I mean, maybe then we get into talking about state banks and that kind of stuff, but the first solution is tax Wall Street, get that money back, refund the teacher pensions, refund the firemen and the police. And
you know, when we were petitioning in Nebraska, some of the more ignorant people came up and they freaked out over the word tax. They were like, not another tax. We don't need more taxes. We had to explain to them, do you realize that you pay a 7 to 12% sales tax on everything you buy, every cup of coffee, every pair of shoes, you know, every box of crayons, and Wall Street pays no transaction tax. And people don't realize there's no such thing legally as a sales tax. All sales taxes are called transaction taxes. If you sell me a sweater, that's a transaction. If we were CPAs, we would not know it as a sales tax. We'd only understand it as a transaction tax. There's no legal word called a sales tax. So Wall Street makes transactions, millions of transactions a day. I don't know. And they 4 quadrillion annually. And if you tax those transactions at 1%, which is well under the sales tax that you and I pay on a transaction. Kyle, can you explain how this 1% works?
It's a sales tax. So it's the reason that the volume is so high of Wall Street transactions is flash trading. They've got the same assets just flying back and forth, literally with lasers. You know, they've installed lasers into these brokerage houses so that they can sort of stay ahead of the market, or, you know, instantaneously see what is happening with the price.
There's big fights in New York real estate to get brokerage firms closer to where the internet wires enter the island of Manhattan. Right. Just because the closer they are, that millisplit second allows them to flash trade faster.
Yeah, because it's all programmed trading. It's basically like if, you know, they've got algorithms where, and that's why they're bringing all the best computer science students in the U.S. are getting taken up into Wall Street because they're basically designing better and better automated systems. And people still think, Wall Street is where investment happens. Does that sound like investment to you?
I just noticed that we're out of time this week. We'll continue this discussion on Monday, July 14th. You can supplement this show by reading A World of Pure Imagination, How Occupy Turned to Anarchy at againstausterity.org. Also visit danfornebraska.com and volunteer or make a donation to his campaign. You've been listening to United Front Radio at ucy.tv/UFR. Have a blessed evening.